We have talked about how to configure a complex form for whether it appears as a subentry or as a reference. Now let's look at what happens when you add components to an entry and what happens relative to the fields that control whether it's a subentry or a reference complex form. Let's go to this entry for BlackBerry. Right now, this is not registered as a complex form in Flex. And the way that we can tell that is because it does not have a complex form type field. It does have a field for complex forms, so I could say it has things built out of it, and it does have a field for components. I can say it's made up out of other things, but it does not have a complex form type field. And that's how I know that right now this is an independent entry, a main entry. So I want to tell Flex that it is a complex form, that it has components. There's two ways I could do that. I can click in the components field, and I could use the ellipsis button to bring up a dialog to find the entries I want to link it to. Or I can come up to the pane bar header and use this menu to say that this Lexeme form has components. And if I do this, it will add the fields that allow me to specify what the components are. And so notice, now it does have a complex form type. That was not there before. And notice that in the blue triangle next to this, there's the option to delete complex form information. And this is the way to make this stop being a complex form. I can turn it back into a main entry, an independent entry, that way. For now, I'm going to leave it. I do want this to be a complex form. But first I want to change the type, and I want to change the I don't want unspecified, I do want compound. I will click OK. And by the way, if I'm curious how many of these types have been used, I can click on the Display Usage Figures button. And I can see there are 2 derivatives, 4 compounds, and 2 phrases in this project. So now it has a complex form type, but it is not linked to any entries. And up here, notice in the minor entry version of it, it says, I am a compound of, and then there's nothing there. So be careful with that. If you make it a complex form, you probably do want to link it to something, because this is not very clear. So again, I can click in the components field, I can click the ellipsis, and now I can start searching for the words that it's built up out of. And one of them is black, and that is in my database, so I can click OK. Keep in mind, create would create a new entry. I don't want to do that. I want OK because I am linking to an existing entry. And so it has made that as one of the components. And up here it says I'm a compound of black. But I want to list both of the components, so I will do this again. And this time I will look for berry, and there's berry, and I will click OK. And so now I have 2 components. And it says I'm a compound of black and berry, but notice it has this other piece. It says C under black. So what does that mean? Well, let's look at something else. Keep in mind that this lists all of the components, and down in the publication settings section, there are other fields. Now, before we looked at the fields that are here for the main entry, the independent entry. These are the fields in the complex form, the subentry. And so here it's saying, where should the subentry show? Which entry should the subentry be under? And you can choose to have it under none of them. And if you have it under none of them, then it will just appear as a reference in those. But notice, even though there are 2 components, only one of them is listed here. So by default, Flex assumes that you don't necessarily want it under all of the components. It only fills in the first one, and it assumes that the others will just have it listed as a reference. That may or may not be what you want, so it's important to be aware that this is what the default behavior is. Now, the explanation for this part should be a little bit more clear now. Here, we are only showing the subentry under black. Okay, so here it's listing both of the components, but if you want to see the full information, only black will show you that. Berry will not. And so see under tells you which of the components to look under for all of the information. So this is a way that you can list all of the components, but still have it as a subentry under only one of them, and this tells the reader where to go. And just for kicks, we can click on the target, and that will take us to the entry, and here we can see that it is listed as a subentry under black. Now, if another way to jump, here where it lists the complex forms, if I control click, that will take me to that entry. And maybe I want to look under berry, so let's click on berry. And here we see that it's listed as a reference and it has the C under black also. So it says I have a compound that's blackberry, but all the guts are listed under black. Now we also have another compound, raspberry, and it's not listed under anything. It's only as a reference. That's why it does not have the C under part. But maybe we don't really want it under black. Maybe we want it here where all of the other berries are. We don't necessarily need it under the color. So let's go back to blackberry. And down at the bottom, in this field, show subentry under, I can click the ellipsis. And now I want to tell it to be a subentry under berry and not black. So I can change the checkboxes. And again, if there was a component missing, I could add a component here. So I've fixed the checkboxes the way I want them. We'll click OK. And so now it's saying the subentry will be under berry. And so up here it still says it's a component of both of them, but it says to go find the full information, look under berry. So I will click berry, and now it's listed there as a subentry. So keep that in mind when you first link things, that the show subentry under field will only show the first component that you linked, not all of them.